In this video, we're testing the xBloom Studio machine, both their kind of own brewer and as well how well the April Brewer is working with it. Hi and welcome. My name is Patrick Rolf and this is Coffee with April. As you can see, we're back in the studio after a little bit of break. We've been busy recording our new podcast series, What Does Coffee Mean to You? We've been competing in world championships and we made a pretty big trip to Shanghai, China for a coffee festival. But we're back in here and we're committed to giving you more content alongside that new podcast project, which you should check out as well. In this video, we're looking at something that we haven't really tapped into before. It's the xBloom Brewers, more specifically the xBloom Studio. We've been kind of following this journey. I think most people in the coffee industry saw this coming a few years ago. There was a lot of talk about it. There was a lot of hype about it. We got a few requests about being a part of it as well. Which we did not kind of jump on, but a friend of us told us about this machine again, and we kind of thought, okay, but let's have a look at it, right? So from my understanding, the kind of baseline idea with this is obviously to be a very sophisticated kind of automated pour over brewer, right? So it's for you that don't necessarily want to pour your own water, grind your own coffee, like you want everything in one place and you want it really kind of slim, compact, easy to use, but and I guess here's like the caveat where it's supposed to also give you a really good cup of coffee. So they have some really interesting, very kind of coffee nerdy aspects of this brewer, which I think any coffee nerd would be very excited about, right? So in this video, we're going to walk through some of those. As always, we're going to show you how we are using this brewer. There is a lot of other videos that are detailing different parts and more technical aspects of it. Our job here is just to show, okay, but we're at April, we brew our coffee, this is how we would do it if we use it. Now, we should say as well that a big part of this concept is to be able to buy pods that is already, I think, pre-dosed with coffee from other roasters. I believe that's a big part of the concept where you kind of buy these pods, you can download their recipes, so you can kind of enjoy the coffee the way that they intended to, which is also a bit interesting. Now, we're not going to do that in this video. Here, we're going to run the kind of manual function to it, which I think is pretty interesting. And we're going to try both their own kind of brewer, which I think they call the Omni Brewer. Not sure why, but they do. Looks a little bit like an Oreo brewer. I think it's like a very small, compact kind of thing. Really tiny paper filter as well. We had some kind of initial concerns about what is the actual brewing volume that we can bring out here, because I'm assuming a lot of people, especially at home, would like to maybe brew 2 cups of coffee, 3 cups of coffee. And I don't really think that's an issue. The only thing you have to consider is obviously recipe, pouring, pulses, all of this, as well as actually be able to fit a container underneath that is large enough and not too high enough to kind of fit within the context of it, right? For this video, we're going to do single brews the way that we do it here at April, because we still believe that a smaller brew has a higher quality than something else. So I'm going to kind of start that first brew using their own Omni Brewer. And then I'm going to walk you through a little bit through the app and how we're using it, what the baseline of the recipe is, and kind of why as well, right? But before that, let's just look at some basics. So you have a menu here that allows you to adjust a few different settings, basically most of the things. From the kind of outlook of this machine and when I first started to use it, I think this is not very intuitive. I think it's quite complicated to navigate. I don't like the, let's say, the dot systems, like it's not completely clear always what the text is. However, they kind of fixed that by using a very intuitive, easy to use app. Now, I say easy to use because you're able to navigate numbers. It's not easy to use for someone that I don't think understand coffee brewing. It's a bit of a jungle. I think it's one of those things where if you don't have basic understanding for coffee brewing and what you're looking for in a recipe, by starting to kind of adjust your own recipe, that's going to be quite complicated. It takes a little bit of time also for me to just set up this kind of basic recipes. However, it is really interesting how much you can actually do with it. there is a lot of room to change different things. 3 styles of pouring. You can obviously change grind size, you can change RPM on the grinder, you can change brewing temperature, you can have different pulses, you can adjust the time in between each pulse. Like it's a quite interesting brewer from that sense, right? I don't think they simplified brewing. They haven't made it easier, but they sure brought a machine that enables you to do some pretty high-end cool things, right? So the kind of coffee nerd side of me thinks this is really interesting. I just don't necessarily see how this is much easier to do at home. However, also to be noted, grinder. So I think this is one of the main challenges always when it comes to these, let's call it a semi-automatic machine. I think that's fair probably. This is based on my reading or research, a 48 millimeter conical burr in this. And so conical and filter coffee, difficult. I'm not saying impossible. And April is about to start working with a concept that might prove me wrong as well. But I think initially, like a flat burr system has been proven to bring out higher quality coffees, at least in the April universe in terms of how we are brewing. So I think that's potentially a limitation. As always, again, when you put a grinder, it doesn't matter if you put it in an espresso machine or whatever it is, it limits the output or the quality of it, right? Now, granted, you can use your own separate grinder, put some coffee in your brewer, and just use this for water pouring, but that kind of defeats the purpose, right? I think, because you can do that pouring with just a kettle. So that's one of the kind of reservations I have in general. That being said, we have been test brewing and it's been coming out pretty nicely. So let us walk through how we're actually brewing to give you a little bit of an insight. And again, this is with their own kind of Omni Brewer. So starting by popping in one of their paper filters. I don't know much details about these filters in general, but we're using them. The coffee that we're using, and as always, like, use good coffee, it will taste better. This is one of our absolute favorite coffees at the moment. A pure selection of an SL34 variety. That was a part of our experience box that we just launched here at April, where we're featuring SL28, SL34, and mixed varieties from our partner farm Kamavindi in Kenya. And both that SL28 and this coffee, which is then the SL34, are part of like my absolute favorite coffees this season. So it's quite extraordinary coffee. And it goes with all the brewers you're using. You know, if you have better coffee, it's going to taste better. So we're going to do a bit of a classic April recipe here. So I'm going to do 12 grams of coffee. And then it's time for the app. So what we're going to use here is pretty much one of our preset recipes, more or less. You can, when you preset it, you can decide if you're using then a pod, if you're using the Omni Brewer, if you're using an external brewer, like in this case, the April Brewer. So you make that selection and then you choose dose, you choose grind size, RPM, ratio, and so on, right? And then you divide that into different pours. So I'm going to start by putting this in, which we simply do here, and taking, in this case, the April mug that we're brewing into, and placing that underneath. It's a really tight fit, right? But I think that's definitely one of the things you have to consider. Obviously, you can also just put this in later. You don't have to put it in now, right? So that's kind of up to you how you choose to do that, right? So we're starting like this with the setup. Little hatchet here for the beans. And then I'm pressing start on the app. And what that's going to do is it's going to ask me to fill the coffee into the hopper, which we're doing. And then from there, I'm going to go, let's go. And here you see it moves over. Grinds out all of that coffee and then kind of go back underneath. And from here, it's starting to pour, right? Now, for that grind size, you have a really kind of smart little introduction to different grind sizes on the back of the water container, actually, which you can use for reference. We have used grind size 50 here, and we have divided the brew into 12 grams of coffee to 200 grams of water, divided into 2 separate pours, with a bit of time in between each pour, right? So basically mimic the style or approach of brewing that we do here at April. So roughly at 34-35 seconds, that first pour is completed. And then we are waiting for that second pour that starts roughly at 40 seconds again, right? Now, one thing I could not understand how to change on this machine, which may just be me not understanding the back end, but I can't figure out how to change the flow rate of the water. So the flow rate of the water is basically locked in at 3.5, which for us would be a little bit too slow in traditional April brewing. So we kind of adjusted the recipe accordingly, right? And then in terms of how the water is distributed, and now at 110 is ready, right? So now just kind of waiting for it to go down. How the water is distributed, you have 3 different kind of setups. So you have circular distribution, you have spiral distribution, and you have a center pour, right? Which is actually really cool that you're able to do that, and you're able to change and adjust also based on the brew, right? So I think in general, the idea behind this is actually really interesting, and there is a lot of different settings that you are able to kind of work with. So the recipe is ready. The app is kind of telling us that it's ready. I'm gonna just quickly here prep a brew with the April Brewer as well, because what we want to do is we want to give you guys the opportunity to kind of hear what we think having these two side by side. And if anyone then has the xBloom at home, this is also a good example of how you can use the xBloom for the April Brewers, right? So, cup number 1. We're taking out that previous. So really easy to take out, clean, organize, and fix. We really actually appreciate that, that it's so easy to use. Now, I go back into the app. I choose a brewer that has an external brewer, which in this case is the April Brewer. Now, here's a little bit of a challenge, because obviously, normally you would put a little holder here, you put your brewer on top of it, but the April Brewer just simply doesn't fit, so you can't really do that. So there will be a little bit of manual labor in order to work with the April Brewer, but it's not that complicated, and we're going to show you how we're doing it. So I'm going to start that recipe, and again, it's going to tell me to fill out the beans, which I'm going to do. And from here, I'm actually holding the brewer underneath, and I'm going to go, let's go. And it's clearly grinding in, moving the brewer over, and then I have to just position it underneath perfectly, pretty much. So like an easy motion to do, not very complicated. I guess it defeats the purpose a little bit of being super easy, and you don't really have to move things around. But here we go, the April Brewer is there. We're using the same recipe as before, so 12 grams of coffee, 200 grams of water. I haven't mentioned the water temperature yet. That sits at 92 degrees Celsius. You're able to adapt that again in the different recipes, which is quite interesting. So now we're just kind of benchmarking here the flow rates. The kind of Omni Brewer is a really small brewer, really tight, very narrow kind of edges and walls. This means some faster flow rate, so the water is going to go through faster. April Brewer open, larger flat bed means a slower brew, but in our case that often means a tastier brew as well, right? But apart from that, we have pretty much mimicked the recipes. There's a little bit difference in the time in between each pour, but very, very similar. So we're here now, and we're going to be just basically 110 again, right? We're done with that second pour, and now we're just going to let it go down, right? So again, like really easy to use, interesting one. Does the April Brewer fit? Well, aesthetically, I think it fits pretty well, and you can definitely brew a cup of coffee. So there is a range to introduce different brewers here. Obviously, maybe a V60 or so on. Maybe that works as well, because it's just going to fit a bit differently. But yeah, interesting kind of a dynamic thing. What we're going to do now, we're just going to let this brew kind of go through. Then we're going to do some tasting and an evaluation, and then we'll get right back to you with a little bit more insight in the difference in taste and what we like and what we don't like. So we're back and we're kind of tasting these two different coffees, right? And first of all, before we kind of deep dive into the quality of the taste experience in the two different cups and if there is any, let's say, difference, to adjust accordingly as well. So we have the Omni Brewer to the left and we have the April Brewer to the right. We're going to give you guys a close-up on the kind of coffee beds as well, because that's always an interesting thing to have a look at. And just like a reference again, we're looking at a 12-gram dose. We're looking at a 16.5 ratio, which in this case is actually then 198 grams of water, just to be very clear on that. We have 100 grams in the first pour, and then technically then it's actually 98 grams in the second pour. It's just a little bit difficult with the app to set like exact numbers on the ratios. So that was kind of easier. They show us some great graphs, which is also quite interesting. Water temperature here is actually 90 degrees. I know I said 92 before, but we made a few different brews and then we actually settled down on 90, which I think tastes a bit better in this case. But again, it's up to you to kind of adjust and change depending on what you think is the most suitable, right? At April, in general, when we brew coffee, we tend to be between 90 and 92. Now, let's have a little bit of a taste. So on the April Brewer first, which I think obviously is a good reference point for us, I think what's interesting is that we're definitely not too far away from, let's say, the conventional taste of an April Brewer, right? We have a good balance, very well integrated acidity. We have a good kind of flavor intensity and then profile to it. The Omni Brewer here actually comes out a little bit more intense. It's a little bit different in balance. I don't want to say off balance because I enjoyed this cup as well. A big part of that is because I really like the green coffee that we have been working. But it shows a little bit more, let's say, vibrant acidity in the cup versus the same recipe on the April Brewer, right? Now, there are a few small details I would consider with the April Brewer here, because one of the things that we think is really important, for example, is pouring height. So how close to the coffee bed you're actually pouring with the water kettle, which in this case, obviously, I'm not able to kind of adjust in a good way. I could kind of fiddle a little bit, but it would be quite difficult to do. And it would be hard to center the pour then in the brewer, because that's also something you would have to do when you bring in an external brewer to the system. But in general, it's two very solid cups of coffees. One is a little bit sweeter. I would say more on the balance side. One is a little bit too sharp in the acidity potentially. But I'm pretty sure with more brewing and more tweaking, you could figure out a really solid recipe on this as well, right? So to have some kind of conclusion here, right? So I would say that this is a quite sophisticated, let's say, water pouring machine more than anything else. Obviously, you have a built-in grinder, which is interesting. The built-in grinder seems to be performing like quite well. I don't taste anything that is obviously negative linked to the burr set, which is great. Because again, often with these kind of semi-automatic machines, that is the biggest challenge. So good work on that. Footprint, really nice. It's small, it looks good. I want to give them extra cred for just like the knobs, for example. They feel really high-end, like the whole vibe and feeling of this. Obviously a very fellow-like aesthetic choice, but I do think it feels more, let's say, luxurious than a lot of the fellow products, because they actually really succeeded here, I think. Don't like the screen here and the way they display the information. I don't think that's clear enough, but that could also just be a personal preference, right? But in the end of the day, you can brutally taste the coffee, and I think this is definitely a machine that we are going to continue to play around with a little bit because it's kind of fun. It's not something I would put at home because I really don't mind pouring my own water on the coffee. But I can see for those that does mind that this is actually a really interesting choice, right? And be curious to kind of dig a little bit deeper into this whole pod system and coffee from different roasters and stuff like that, which again is a different context for the brewer, but you can clearly brew a tasty cup of coffee. So check on that. The design and the visual is also really interesting. I'm still probably going to prefer, when it comes to machine grinders, to have a flat burr grinder, but it's a solid cup of coffee, and I'm sure if you give me like a few weeks with this machine, there's so much you can do and tweak on the recipe that is really interesting, right? Like, the app is a jungle, and I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean that in a way where you have so many different options. And for someone that actually knows what these different variables do to impact the final taste of the coffee, this is like a fun little machine. Like, there's a lot you can do, right? So yeah, I think that's it for this time. It's been an interesting little thing to play with. We can brew some tasty coffee, and you have a lot of very high-end settings that can really fine-tune your coffee, which is interesting. I know some of you had this machine already, some of you had the older version of this machine as well, so we would love to just hear your comments and thoughts on how it's brewing for you, how you are using it, what you like and what you don't like. It's always really interesting. Again, we're back after a little bit of a break with the World Brewers Championships, big China trips, and a new podcast launched. And we want to continue to do these videos alongside our podcast project, which you should check out as well. As per usual, we're tuning back into Patreon, and we're sharing thoughts and ideas and the upcoming projects there, so make sure you tune in. And with that, we just want to thank you all for watching as per always, and make sure you comment, subscribe, and all of this. It really makes a difference. So thank you for watching, and have a good day. We want to give a special thank you to all of our Patreon supporters. It's because of you that we are able to continue to make these videos. And we want you all to feel free to always come with suggestions and ideas on the content that you want to see, because we are doing this for you and because of you. Thank you from all of us here at April.